The Earth is quietly losing its last green spaces. According to the United Nations, more than 40% of the planet's land surface is already desert, and nearly the same amount is actively sliding toward desertification. In these places, water disappears, soil turns to dust, and life retreats. Yet in northern China, deep inside one of the country's harshest deserts, an unlikely reversal took place. Over the course of 3 decades, a single project planted hundreds of millions of trees, reintroduced millions of animals, and built one of the world's most unusual renewable energy systems. The result was not just greenery, but a functioning ecosystem where sand once ruled. This story begins in the Kubuqi Desert, the 7th largest desert in China. Stretching across more than 7,000 square miles, it lies in Inner Mongolia, where winters are brutally cold and summers scorch the ground. Today, dunes rise like frozen waves. But only a few generations ago, this land supported grasslands, villages, and farms. Then the winds intensified, vegetation vanished, and sand began to move. Entire communities were swallowed. By the late 20th century, dunes over 60 meters high advanced steadily eastward, burying roads and farmland and forcing families to abandon land they had relied on for centuries. China responded with force and scale. Windbreak forests were planted. Grazing was banned. Wells were drilled deep into the earth. But the desert kept advancing. The problem was systemic. Without soil structure, without moisture retention, every intervention failed. It was here that Wang Wenbao, a former schoolteacher from the region, made a decision that would redefine desert control. Wang was not an engineer or a government official. He rode a bicycle across shifting sand to teach classes, often fighting winds strong enough to bury his wheels. Instead of leaving, he decided to stay. His idea was simple but radical. If the desert could not be pushed back directly, it would have to be outcompete. Beginning in the late 1980s, Wang invested everything he had into an experiment that combined biology, economics, and long-term patience. The foundation of his strategy was the willow tree. Willows are unusually suited to hostile environments. Their roots can reach extraordinary depths, tapping groundwater far below the surface while binding loose sand together. Millions were planted across the desert, forming long green corridors that slowed wind and trapped moisture. Alone, however, trees were not enough. They needed nutrients. And the desert had none. This is where the most unexpected element entered the system. Rabbits. Wang introduced Rex rabbits, a breed originally developed in Europe for its dense, high-quality fur. These animals were not released freely into the desert. They were raised in controlled ecological systems, feeding on willow shoots and dry grasses. What made them extraordinary was not just their productivity, but their biology. Rex rabbits reproduce rapidly, tolerate extreme temperatures, require little water, and most importantly, their manure is rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The exact elements desert sand lacks. As the rabbits fed, they fertilized the land. Their manure transformed sterile sand into dark, living soil. Even more remarkable, the rabbits could not digest grass seeds. Each time they fed, seeds passed through intact, planted naturally along with fertilizer. When seasonal rains arrived, vegetation followed. Grass appeared where none had grown in generations. A closed ecological loop formed. Willows provided food and shade. Rabbits nourished the soil. Revived soil supported new plant life. Within a few years, areas once written off as dead land could support crops. Scientists estimated that each acre under this system could generate several tons of organic humus annually, turning sand into arable soil in just a few seasons. The transformation scaled rapidly. Hundreds of millions of willows were planted, forming a green barrier that reduced wind speeds dramatically and trapped millions of tons of sand each year. Entire villages returned. Local economies followed. Rabbit farming became a reliable income source, lifting thousands of families out of poverty with relatively small startup costs. What began as environmental restoration became a functioning economic system. Wang did not stop there. In the heart of the desert, he introduced solar energy. The Jiunma solar power plant, shaped like a galloping horse and visible from space, became one of the largest agrophotovoltaic projects in the world. Beneath nearly 200,000 solar panels, grass grew in the shade. Sheep, rabbits, and geese grazed freely, managing vegetation without machines. The panels generated electricity while stabilizing soil and reducing evaporation. Energy production, agriculture, and land restoration merged into a single system. Within a few years, thousands of acres around the solar plant turned green. Coal use dropped. Carbon emissions fell. Groundwater levels began to rise. Wildlife returned. Deer, foxes, and migratory birds reappeared in numbers not seen for decades. Native plants followed. The soil, once lifeless dust, became loose, dark, and fragrant with organic life. By the early 2010s, international attention followed. The United Nations recognized Kubuqi as a global model for combating desertification, one of only a handful of such sites worldwide. It later became an international demonstration center for land restoration. What had been considered impossible was now studied as policy. But the story carries an important warning. Rabbits are not inherently saviors. History offers a stark contrast. In 19th-century Australia, a small number of rabbits introduced for hunting multiplied uncontrollably, destroying grasslands and accelerating desertification across vast regions. The difference was management. In Kubuqi, rabbits were never released unchecked. They were part of a tightly controlled system. Biology alone did not save the desert. Structure did. Even in China, debate remains. Critics argue that the success of Kubuqi depends as much on large-scale investment, centralized planning, and technology as on rabbits themselves. Others warn that nutrient overload from manure could create new environmental pressures if mismanaged. These concerns are real. Restoration at scale always carries risk. Yet the results are undeniable. From a collapsing desert economy, Kubuqi generated billions in ecological and industrial value. More importantly, it demonstrated a principle that resonates far beyond China. Desertification is not reversed by force, but by systems. By aligning economics with ecology. By designing closed loops where waste becomes input and survival becomes profitable. Today, versions of the Kubuqi model are appearing around the world. In Spain's drought-stricken south, regenerative agriculture and solar shade systems are being deployed to slow soil loss. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, similar principles are being tested under different climates and cultures. The specifics change. The logic remains. The desert was never truly empty. It was simply waiting for conditions that allowed life to return. If one of the harshest landscapes on Earth can be revived, the question is no longer whether deserts can be healed. It is whether humanity is willing to think long enough, invest patiently enough, and design wisely enough to do it elsewhere. What do you think? Could systems like this help restore other threatened lands? And where should the next experiment begin?